I'm Lauren Ashford, 33 years old, and at my sister's college graduation, my parents stood up in front of a crowd and said, I was no longer their daughter. No warning, no explanation, just a smile for her and silence for me. What they didn't realize was that I already knew what they'd done. The forged signature, the missing inheritance, the house they sold behind my back. They thought they were cutting me out quietly, but I was the one about to make everything public. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments. And if you've ever had to stand alone in a room full of people who should have had your back, hit that like and subscribe button. I got there early, not because I was excited just to see if they'd really done it. If they had the nerve to erase me completely, it was hot already, even in the shade. Harvard's campus was glowing under the morning sun, full of proud parents, fresh-pressed suits, floral dresses, camera flashes. Seniors in gowns buzzed like bees hugging each other, checking programs, fixing their caps. I walked slower when I spotted them. My mom Patricia was standing near the reserved section in a pale blue pantsuit, not a hair out of place. My dad Gerald held his phone in one hand and kept glancing at his watch. And between them stood Emily, the golden child smiling in her crimson robe, the cords layered down her front like trophies. They didn't notice me right away. When they did, my mother looked at me like I was someone she maybe knew from her country club. "Oh, Lauren, you came," she said flat, like it didn't matter. I got the invitation, I told her, trying to ignore the way her words stung. She gave a dry laugh. "You must have seen a forwarded version. I'm not sure your name made it on the RSVP list." My dad didn't even look up. Emily gave me a quick hug, short, careful, her eyes darting to our mother before she let go. "You look great," I said quietly. "Thanks. I'm glad you're here," she whispered back, but her voice was tight, like she wasn't sure if saying that would get her in trouble. There was a sign near the entrance printed in gold script. The Ashford family, Patricia, Gerald, Emily, plus 2 guests. I scanned it twice. My name wasn't on it. When they handed me a badge, it was white plain. No crest, just the word guest. I stood there for a long moment staring at it. I remembered helping Mom design the family crest years ago, the summer I was 14. We spent a week picking fonts, but now I didn't even get a ribbon. I should have left. Instead, I clipped the badge to my jacket and walked toward the tent like I didn't feel a thing. The ceremony started just after 11. I sat alone in the back beside a toddler and an older man who was snoring softly through the speeches. "Professors," spoke then the dean. And then my father stepped up to the mic. He adjusted his tie and smiled like he was accepting an award. "Today," he said, "we honor the drive and brilliance of our eldest daughter, Emily Ashford." The applause was loud, cameras flashing, but his voice stayed calm as he went on. "This day marks a new direction for our family, a shift in values, in vision. And with that, we've made a difficult decision. From this day forward, we will no longer extend ourselves to those who no longer align with our family's integrity." He paused. "That includes our younger daughter, Lauren." Silence. No gasp, no protest, just a few whispers behind me and the sound of someone shifting uncomfortably in their seat. I didn't stand. I didn't flinch. I just sat there watching the corner of the stage, my fingers resting still on my knees. I didn't remember walking out, just that I did. No rush, no panic, just one foot in front of the other, like I'd rehearsed it before. At the reception, I looked for a place to sit. There was a table for Ashford and guests. I wasn't on it. Emily's college roommate was. So was our Aunt Carol. Even someone I hadn't seen since 8th grade. A girl from middle school looked up from another table. "Oh, hey," she said. "I thought you weren't invited. Your mom said it was just family this time." She smiled awkwardly. I didn't respond. I walked past the table, picked up a glass of Prosecco from a tray, and stepped outside without saying a word. I didn't head home right away. I wandered through the city past cafes packed with families, celebrating past people laughing on sidewalks, all glowing with pride and closeness. It was dusk before I got on the train, and by the time I reached my apartment in Somerville, I still hadn't cried. I dropped the program on the counter, but it fell open to a photo. My parents and Emily beaming the caption, "A proud day for the Ashford family." I wasn't mentioned. Later that night, I opened an old yearbook and flipped to the tribute section from Emily's high school graduation. There was an ad paid for by our parents, a message to the daughter who never stopped shining, a photo of the three of them on our front porch. I'd been in that photo, but in this version I'd been cropped out, not forgotten, just removed. That's when something shifted. Not a breakdown, not a meltdown, just a tilt, a quiet click. The next morning I woke up sore from the floor and stiff in the neck. The yearbook was still open beside me, the page with that old family photo lying face up like it had been waiting for me to see it again in daylight. My face wasn't in the frame. It used to be, but they'd removed it cleanly, like I'd never been there at all. I stood up, made coffee, and got dressed like it was any other Tuesday. I went to work at the nonprofit where I managed donor relations. No one mentioned the graduation. Why would they? My family had always been careful about appearances, and I didn't make a habit of talking about them, not at the office. Around 10, I was pouring a second cup when Rachel, one of our junior analysts, wandered into the break room and leaned against the counter. She was scrolling through her phone. "Hey," she said casually, "your sister's graduation looked amazing. That red dress she wore? Wow." I kept my hand steady on the mug. "Yeah, she always looks the part." "I didn't realize you were there," she said, smiling. "I was," I replied. "Just in the shadows, like always." She didn't catch the edge in my voice. She laughed and said something about how I was always so mysterious. Then she walked off. And just like that, I was alone again in the break room, staring at my reflection in the coffee pot. When I passed Alan, the guy in finance who used to golf with my dad, he gave me a nod but didn't say anything. Another woman I used to babysit for pretended to dig through her tote bag when we crossed paths. No one was rude, they were just quiet, and I understood that kind of quiet. The kind where people choose not to see something because seeing it would mean they'd have to do something about it. At my desk, I opened my drawer and pulled out the stack of old birthday cards I'd kept, all addressed to our daughters, all carefully worded. One of them was signed "From the Ashford family," like I was just a branch of something, not a name on the tree. A few years ago, they sent out a holiday card to donors that only featured Emily's photo. When I asked, my mother said it was a branding choice. It had never been just one moment. It was thousands of them. Small, quiet omissions I'd let go of because it was easier to tell myself it didn't matter. But after what happened at the reception, after seeing that ivory card on the table, the one that read, "To our only daughter Emily," I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I'd taken that card with me, slipped it into my purse before I walked out of the tent. Nobody saw. Ghosts don't make noise when they leave. That night, I didn't cry. I just sat at the kitchen table with that card beside me and started opening old folders on my laptop. The screen lit the room with a pale blue glow. Outside rain tapped lightly on the window. I pulled a blanket over my shoulders and started going through files I hadn't touched in years. There was still a shared drive connected to my email from back when I helped with accounting for the Ashford Foundation. They'd never removed my access. I'd been the one who set it up. I opened it without knowing exactly what I was looking for. Old tax records, board meeting minutes, donation reports, the usual. And then I saw a folder labeled Holdings, Updated. Inside was a PDF transfer authorization, Seaside Property, Final. I clicked. There it was. My full legal name typed above a shaky-looking signature. It was close enough to pass at a glance, but I knew my own handwriting. The L was wrong, the A didn't curve right. It was a poor copy, but it was notarized. I looked at the notary's name in the margin, Savannah Ashford, my cousin. I grabbed a lease agreement from the filing cabinet, the one I'd signed when I moved into my apartment. I held it beside the document on the screen. The signatures weren't even close. It wasn't just an insult. It was fraud. The beach house in Cape Elizabeth had been the one thing my dad left for me in the will. The place where I painted porch rails during college, where I rinsed salt water off my feet after swimming. The same house Emily used for her 30th birthday retreat, which turned into a backyard bash with a guest list of 50. I shut the laptop slowly and leaned back in my chair. I didn't know what to do next, so I called the only person in my family who ever answered the phone with my name. Aunt Carol picked up after 2 rings. Her voice was rough with sleep. "Lauren, honey, is everything okay?" "Not really," I said, and my throat caught. I told her what I'd found, the forged signature that transfers Savannah's name on the paperwork. There was a pause. "I didn't know what to do," she said finally. "Your mother told me it was just paperwork, something to do with taxes. You knew they moved my name off the deed." She didn't answer at first. Then I thought it was a mistake or something they'd tell you about later. "I'm sorry, I should have said something." We sat in silence for a while. I heard her exhale. "You know how your mother is," she added, her voice cracking. "And your dad? He follows her lead." I slid down the kitchen wall until I was sitting on the floor, the phone pressed to my ear. "I'm tired of making excuses for them." "I know," she whispered. "I know." By the time the rain stopped, I was still on the kitchen floor, surrounded by legal pads and highlighters, and the old laptop that had gathered dust for months. I made coffee and sat at the dining table, scrolling through property registries and deed databases like someone chasing a trail in the dark. That morning I found it. Parcel ID 0017426, Bar Harbor, Maine. The house with the cedar shingles and rocking chairs on the porch. The one my grandmother had left to the Ashford Family Trust. Status sold. Buyer Harlow Holdings, LLC. I clicked on the business name. Registered agent, a Boston attorney Emily had recently featured in a LinkedIn post about her new firm. They hadn't just transferred it. They sold it. No announcement, no explanation. Not even a group email. Just gone. That house funded her business. The same house I helped repaint. The one my grandmother once said would belong to both her granddaughters. The tagline on Emily's website read, "Legacy-minded investing, inspired by family values." I closed the laptop. My hands were trembling. This wasn't grief. It was something colder. I threw on a coat and walked to the bookstore down the street. I wasn't planning to buy anything. I just needed a place to think. Near the self-help aisle, I heard a voice behind me. "Lauren." I turned. Mrs. Henderson, my mom's old friend, stood there holding a book about graceful aging and smiling like her teeth were knives. I heard Emily's expanding into real estate. "That's wonderful, isn't it?" I gave a polite nod. "Funny, I thought that house was still in the family." She blinked. "Oh, I'm sure I don't know the details. Parents make moves without their kids all the time." She smiled again, the kind of smile that told you to keep your voice down. I left without saying anything else. By the time I got home, there was a text from an old college friend. "Your folks sold the beach house. Emily's killing it. Honestly jealous." That word jealous sat like a stone in my mouth. People envied her because they didn't know what it cost. That was the moment I knew what I had to do. I changed my clothes, printed the documents, and packed a bag. Some answers weren't online. Some were behind polished desks and names on brass plates. And I knew exactly where to go. I parked across the street from the Ashford Foundation's downtown office and sat there for a while, engine off, watching the building through the windshield. The tinted glass gave no hint of what was happening inside. The last time I'd been here, I was 16, holding a printed copy of my scholarship essay and wearing a navy dress that was too tight in the shoulders. My mother told me to wait outside until someone called me in. She didn't want me causing a distraction during her board meeting. Now, 17 years later, I wasn't here to ask for anything. Inside the lobby looked the same polished marble floors, tall potted plants, a wall-mounted mission statement about integrity and impact. The girl at the front desk, maybe an intern, offered a hesitant smile and asked if I had an appointment. I didn't answer. I just walked past her heels, tapping quietly against the tile. My mother didn't flinch when I entered her office. She glanced up from her computer, gave a small nod like we were two colleagues between meetings. "Lauren," she said, "I imagine you'd like a few minutes." She gestured toward the leather chair across from her desk. I didn't sit. The room hadn't changed white orchids near the window, framed awards lined along the bookshelf, and a photo of her and Emily on stage at a fundraiser mid-laugh. I stood still. She folded her hands. "I regret that you felt hurt. But we made a decision based on the family's future." I didn't respond right away. I watched the way she avoided eye contact, how her fingers tapped softly against the desk. "You don't regret what you did," I said. "You regret how it looked." She let out a slow breath through her nose. "You're still welcome at events, just not as a representative of the family legacy. I hope you understand it's about cohesion, simplicity." "You mean control?" She tilted her head. "People notice when the narrative gets cluttered." "I hope they do," I said. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. That evening, I changed into a black dress I'd almost forgotten I owned and headed to the donor gala I had RSVP'd to 6 months earlier, back when I still believed I had a place in their world. The ballroom buzzed with laughter plates, clinking introductions floating from one table to another. My name badge didn't say Ashford. It just said R. I kept to the edges, speaking only when spoken to. During dinner, a waiter poured champagne into fluted glasses, and someone dimmed the lights. My father stood to give a toast. "To our only daughter, Emily," he said, "whose vision continues to guide this family forward." People applauded. Emily smiled. She didn't correct him. No one looked in my direction, but I felt the weight of eyes that quickly turned away. I placed my glass on the table without taking a sip and excused myself before dessert. No one stopped me. Outside, the night air was cool. I walked 2 blocks before ordering a rideshare. In the back seat, the city lights passed in blurs of yellow and blue. I replayed the moments on a loop, the words, the silences, the way they stood just close enough to shine, but far enough to avoid the mess. By morning, I was at my kitchen counter laptop open, legal pad stacked beside me, a half-empty mug going cold. I hadn't slept. I didn't feel tired. I combed through contracts I was never meant to see, pulling old emails, metadata from PDFs, financial notes from shared drives they never removed me from. Somewhere in that quiet mess was the truth they'd worked so hard to hide. By 10 o'clock, the envelope was ready. Burgundy velvet, the kind my mother used to fill with stationery for thank-you notes and birthday wishes. This one held trust documents, a notarized affidavit, and a link to recorded audio files. I walked it over to the law offices of Warren Bell, their longtime estate attorney. The last time I saw him, I was standing beside my grandmother's casket. He opened the door himself, squinting like he wasn't sure whether to shake my hand or call security. "I just need 2 minutes," I said. He took the envelope. His fingers hovered over the typed label, reading it slowly before meeting my eyes. "I assume this comes with expectations." "No," I said. "It comes with consequences." I didn't wait for a reply. In the elevator, I caught my reflection in the mirrored panel eyes, shadowed hair slightly out of place, but more awake than I'd felt in years. The recordings had taken months to gather. Short clips from hallway conversations, board meetings, pre-event rehearsals. I'd been quiet. They assumed I wasn't listening anymore. They assumed wrong. One clip echoed in my mind, my mother at a prep luncheon saying, "We only use Emily's face in the marketing. Lauren doesn't align with the image we're building." And my father replying, "She used to read everything." Back at home, I sat on the rug and stared at the old photo still tucked inside a bookshelf frame, one that hadn't been edited not yet. All four of us standing on the front steps before the edges of the picture started shrinking. I didn't feel angry in that moment. I felt still, like the needle had moved but quietly. I hadn't mailed the envelope with bitterness. It was a receipt, a record that I had seen what they did, and I wasn't going to let silence make it disappear. That night, I called my attorney and told him what was coming. "I don't want revenge," I said, "but I'm not letting them use my silence as consent." There was a pause. Then he said, "Then it starts now." The next morning, before I even opened my inbox, my phone lit up with calls, blocked numbers. One from a DC reporter. I didn't answer. But when I tapped the screen there, it was front page of a nonprofit watchdog site, luxury charity, under scrutiny, anonymous sources question, financial integrity at the Ashford Foundation. The article didn't name me. It didn't have to. By the time I finished reading the headline, my coffee had gone cold. I sat at the kitchen counter staring at the screen as the article loaded. The language was clinical quotes, timelines, documents cited, but every line felt personal. They referenced internal emails, inconsistencies in grant disbursements, and whispers from former stakeholders who'd felt pressured to remain silent. My name wasn't printed anywhere, but the story was mine. By lunch, I saw the ripple start. A few donors pulled out of upcoming events. A gala was postponed indefinitely. The foundation issued a vague statement about transparency and reevaluation. But it wasn't enough. The article didn't stop there. It included excerpts from old email threads, notes about board decisions where the younger Ashford was labeled a complication. Then came the part I hadn't expected someone had leaked a recording. Not all of them, just one. The same clip I'd sent to my lawyer. My mother's voice echoed through the embedded audio. "We only use Emily's face for marketing materials. Lauren doesn't fit the image." Then came my father's chuckle. "She used to read everything." The audio spread fast. Social media, nonprofit forums, group chats. I wasn't part of anymore. The internet took it from there, unpacking every word, replaying every syllable. I didn't post. I didn't comment. I didn't need to. That afternoon, I went for a walk, hoping to clear my head. At the corner deli, the cashier smiled but didn't say much. I passed a bus stop where someone scrolled past the article on their phone. I kept walking. When I got home, I found a message waiting in my inbox from a PR firm I recognized. They'd worked with the foundation for years. The subject line was blank. The message was short. "We're preparing a unifying statement. Would love to include a quote from you. Your voice matters." There was no greeting, no signature, just a line dropped into the silence, hoping I'd give them something they could shape. I didn't reply. That evening, my mother tried to salvage what she could. A luncheon was held at her favorite club in Beacon Hill. The invite went out quietly, mostly to board members and longtime supporters. According to someone I trusted, only 2 people showed. Emily didn't come. I imagined my mother standing at the head of the table, lips pressed into a polite smile, trying to spin phrases like healing and unity into something that might hold. But the damage had already spread. Donors were asking questions about Bar Harbor, about the trust, about the signature. They weren't angry. They were finished. That night I refreshed the article. A new image had been added. My mother leaving the foundation building wearing a blazer I recognized from one of her fundraisers. But something was missing. The lapel pin. She used to wear it to every event, the custom crest we designed together when I was 14.
She said it gave her a sense of pride, like carrying the family name on her collar. It was gone. I sat on my couch with the lights-off laptop on my knees. Outside, the street light cast shadows against the living room wall. I looked across the room at the bookshelf where the family photo still sat, the one they'd never edited, the one with all four of us standing on the front porch before the silences grew too wide to cross. I thought about sending a statement of my own, a reply to the PR firm, a post, something. Instead, I did nothing.
The court hearing had already been scheduled, quietly. No press, no family notifications, just paperwork, witnesses, and a judge who didn't know our names. The morning of the hearing, I dressed simply. No dramatic coat, no sharp jewelry, just black slacks and a gray blouse, neat and quiet. My attorney Philip met me outside the courthouse and handed me a slim folder. "They're all here," he said. "Every document, every exhibit." Inside the courtroom was smaller than I expected. No wood paneling, no dramatic lighting, just rows of benches, a judge's bench, and the steady hum of fluorescent lights. The air smelled faintly of dust and old carpet. My parents were already seated at the table across from us. My mother sat upright, arms crossed, jaw tight. My father stared down at his hands. Emily was there too, scrolling through her phone. The judge called the hearing to order. Philip stood and submitted our exhibits, property records, trust documents, copies of the notarized affidavit. No one objected. Then he submitted the certified will, the one dated before the revised version the foundation had filed. This version, he explained, names Lauren Ashford as the primary beneficiary of the Bar Harbor estate and any future disbursements from the Ashford Family Trust. Emily stopped scrolling. My mother turned sharply toward me. My father's voice cracked. "That version? It wasn't... That was never..." The judge raised her hand. "Was it notarized and properly witnessed?" Philip nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. By the same legal team who handled the original estate division. They were replaced shortly after this was filed." The room went quiet. Then came the recording. Philip played the clip. My mother's voice again. "We only use Emily's face for marketing." My father's laugh. "She used to read everything." No one spoke. Someone in the back row dropped a pen. The sound echoed. My mother stood. "You ungrateful girl," she hissed. "You waited all this time just to destroy us. I stood too." My voice stayed even. I waited so I wouldn't destroy myself in the process. The judge leaned forward. "The Bar Harbor property shall revert to Miss Lauren Ashford. The Ashford Trust disbursements will be frozen pending audit. And in light of the evidence, the Foundation's financial records are hereby referred to the State Attorney General." Emily gathered her purse and left without a word. My father stayed seated. My mother tried to regain her composure, but her hands trembled as she reached for her water. Philip glanced over. "You okay?" I didn't answer right away. I looked down at my lapel. There was no pin, but the judge's final words echoed in my mind, "Miss Ashford, the rightful heir." I didn't go back to the apartment right away after the hearing. I walked for a while instead, through side streets that had already started to darken, past storefronts closing up for the evening, past a church with its doors open and the hum of choir practice floating out into the air. I kept moving until the buzz in my ears faded and my thoughts settled enough to hold shape. By the time I got home, I still hadn't fully exhaled. I made tea, turned off the lights, and sat on the floor with my back against the couch. The folder from court sat on the coffee table unopened. I didn't need to look. I already knew what it contained. I picked up the framed photo near the bookshelf, the one from years ago before everything shifted. I turned it over in my hands. It was the last time I remembered feeling like I belonged to something. Not admired, not displayed, just included. The court ruling had made it real legally, But I knew that wasn't the part that mattered. It was something else, something quieter. I didn't feel triumphant, I felt still. That weekend, I drove up to Bar Harbor for the first time in years. The house looked smaller than I remembered, a little more worn around the edges. The cedar shingles had faded, and one of the porch rails was loose. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. It smelled like salt air and old pine. Dust had settled across the furniture. The last time I'd been here, I was 26, sanding the floorboards in the upstairs bedroom after work. My father had stopped by, said it looked good, and never came back. I opened the windows, let the breeze come through. Then I walked from room to room, checking hinges, flipping light switches, running water from the taps, just to hear it move. In the kitchen, I found a small ceramic bowl I'd made in high school, still tucked in the cabinet. The glaze had cracked along one side, but it held. I left it out on the counter. For 2 days I stayed there. I brought a folding chair onto the porch and sat with my feet on the railing, listening to the wind pass through the trees. I made a list in a notebook of everything the house needed. Nothing fancy, just updates, repairs, a plan. I drove back Monday morning. Before I left, I took one photo from the front steps. Nothing dramatic, no filter, just the porch, the sky, and the house standing still. Back in Somerville, I started making calls, not to realtors, not to lawyers, to people I'd met through work directors of youth programs, women who ran transitional housing initiatives, friends from the nonprofit world who always made time when someone called with purpose. I didn't tell them everything. I just asked the questions that mattered. What would you do with a space like this? Who needs it most? Within a week, I had a list, small focused. Women coming out of foster care, young writers with no place to stay, people who needed time and space and quiet to build something of their own. The next few weeks moved fast. Permits, paperwork, contractor estimates, furniture sourcing. I wasn't trying to restore the house to what it was. I wanted it to become something else. I didn't post about it online. No newsletters, no foundation updates. I submitted the plans through a community trust, listed the space as a residency under a neutral name, and funded it with a portion of the inheritance the court had restored. There were no photos of me in the press packet. No mention of the Ashford name. Just a one-line mission, a space for voices that were never invited to the table. The first 2 residents moved in at the start of spring. One was a poet finishing her first collection. The other had just aged out of care and was learning how to write her own grants. I didn't ask for details. I just gave them the keys and let the quiet do the rest. That same week, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address, but the handwriting on the front was familiar, sharp, slanted. Emily's. Inside was a single sheet of paper, 10 words handwritten. You were right. I'm sorry it took this to see it. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. I placed the note in a small lockbox in my closet, along with the family crest pin my mother used to wear, the same one I'd kept after the hearing. Neither item held the same weight anymore, but I kept them, not as reminders of what was taken, but of what I chose to carry forward. The house didn't erase the past. It didn't fix what had been broken, but it was a start. A real physical place where people could come in, sit down, and be seen. No branding, no expectations, just space to begin again. I never thought silence could be this loud. Not angry silence or cold silence, just the kind that sits in a room with you and lingers. The kind that fills up a space after something finally ends. That's how it felt in the weeks after the foundation shut down operations. There was no press release, no official announcement. Just a notice tucked into a community newsletter. The Ashford Foundation has suspended programming pending board restructuring and legal review. No one said my name, but I knew the echo behind those words. My parents didn't reach out. Not a text, not an email, nothing. I heard through someone else, someone I used to work with, that my mother had stepped down from the board and wasn't returning calls from her usual donor circle. My father had been seen leaving a tax attorney's office 2 towns over. He didn't speak to the press. He never did. The only sound that broke through the quiet came in the form of one brown envelope. It arrived without postage, slipped under my apartment door sometime on a Thursday afternoon. No markings, just my name. Inside was a folded letter. Simple, 10 words. You were right. I'm sorry it took this to see it. It was in Emily's handwriting. There was no return address, no explanation, just the words. They didn't undo anything. They didn't ask for anything either. I placed the letter in the same lockbox where I kept the old crest pin and the original will from my grandmother's estate. I closed the lid and didn't open it again. That weekend, I drove back up to Bar Harbor. The air had warmed since my last visit, and the coastal breeze carried the smell of seagrass and distant bonfires. When I pulled into the driveway, 2 folding chairs sat out on the porch. I hadn't left them there. One of the residents, a young woman named Betrayal, stepped outside barefoot, holding a paint-streaked notebook. She waved. "I'm almost done with my final draft," she said, grinning. "We're printing chapbooks next week." I smiled. "Good. Let me know if you need help with layout." Inside the house was full of life. Not loud, not chaotic, just steady movement. Someone was boiling water for tea in the kitchen. A window had been propped open in the hallway with a stack of books. Soft music played in one of the upstairs bedrooms. There were shoes by the door, laptops charging near the wall, drafts of poems on the counter beside a half-finished grocery list. None of it was polished. All of it felt right. I stayed through Sunday, not as a guest, not as an overseer, just present. I ate dinner with the residents, lasagna made from scratch served on mismatched plates. Afterward, we sat outside, while one of them read a few pages from her manuscript. No one interrupted. Everyone listened. When I left the next morning, I walked the perimeter of the yard, checking the porch steps, the swing hooks, the gutters. I made notes for maintenance small fixes. The big things were already done. Back in Providence, I returned to the Literacy Center. The building had finally completed its renovation, and the official opening was scheduled for the end of the month. No ribbon cutting, just an invitation-only gathering with the local staff and the kids who had helped unpack the first shipment of books. The plaque in the entryway had arrived the day before. One of the volunteers had installed it while I was out. It was simple black metal with gold lettering. It read, "In memory of Elise Ashford for the granddaughters they erased, and the ones who refused to stay erased." I stood in front of it longer than I meant to. I hadn't visited her grave since the court ruling. I hadn't brought flowers or sat on the bench near the old oak tree where she used to take us as kids, but I knew she would have understood. This place was her kind of tribute. I kept working, quietly, steadily. A few grant writers started reaching out for collaboration. One small-town library wanted to model their new after-school program on our curriculum. A guidance counselor from Connecticut sent a thank you card after one of her students got accepted to the residency. The name Ashford didn't show up in any of it. I didn't correct them. Late one night, I found myself at the kitchen table sorting old files for tax season. I came across a manila folder with old utility bills, paycheck stubs from years ago, even a faded grocery receipt with a note written in the margin. It said, "Freeze card if balance goes over $150. Dad likes to forget. I remembered that day. I was 19. I'd offered to do the shopping, but he handed me a prepaid card and said not to spend too much. Emily needed new shoes for her debate meet. I'd bought frozen pizza and cereal and came home with a receipt he never looked at. It wasn't about the money, it was the pattern. The things I'd pushed aside because I thought they didn't count. But they did. Every little quiet thing that had once made me feel invisible now had a name, a shape, and a place. That night I stood in the hallway and looked at the spot where the family portrait used to hang, the one with the edited frame, the one they replaced years ago with just Emily. I didn't put a new photo up. I left the wall bare. 6 months had passed since the ruling. Summer had come and gone, and the pace of things had settled into something steady, clean, ordinary. I spent my mornings at the Literacy Center just outside Providence, and my weekends either in Bar Harbor or helping with outreach programs for the residency. Life had become quiet in a way that didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The day of the final check-in at the center, I arrived early. The main room still smelled faintly of new paint and lemon polish. Folding chairs had been arranged in imperfect rows, each one holding a handmade program designed by one of the teens. The back table was lined with cupcakes and cups of juice. Nothing expensive, nothing flashy, just enough. A group of kids filtered in slowly, backpacks slung over shoulders, some still tucking pencils into their hair. There was no photographer, no guest list. Just the people who showed up every week to write, read aloud, or sit quietly with their journals. Near the entryway, the engraved plaque had been polished, though I hadn't asked anyone to do that. In memory of Lauren Ashford for the granddaughters they erased, and the ones who refused to stay erased. No one asked about the name. They just nodded as they passed it. I didn't speak at the event. I didn't need to. I sat in the back watching as each student stood up to read something they had written, a poem, a paragraph, the beginning of a letter. Their voices were steady, some quiet, some strong. Every one of them stayed in the moment, completely heard. At one point, a boy with a gap-toothed grin walked over to me and held something out in his hand. It was a paper badge folded from construction paper, the edges uneven and held together with glue that hadn't quite dried. "This is for you," he said, like he was giving me something official. "Because you showed up." I took it gently, careful not to smudge the corner. "You made this." He nodded. "It's like the badges the important people wear." I smiled and pinned it over my lapel, right where the old Ashford crest had once sat. This one didn't have gold thread or polished enamel, but it held more than any title I'd ever been given. I stayed through the end of the program. When the chairs were pushed back and the music played low, I stood near the window and watched the late afternoon sun stretch across the floor. It felt like something closing, but not in a sharp way, more like a book being placed back on a shelf where it belonged. Later that evening, I returned to my apartment. I changed into sweatpants, poured myself a glass of water, and opened the window to let the breeze in. My phone buzzed once, a new email this time from a local nonprofit newsletter. The headline read, "Former Foundation Properties Now Supporting New Community Initiatives." My name wasn't mentioned. Neither was the trust. But the article listed Bar Harbor as a new writer's retreat for women from foster care backgrounds, with full support and funding under anonymous donors. I clicked through the gallery. There was a photo of the front porch. 2 women sat on the steps, one of them barefoot, holding a book open in her lap. The caption just said, "Quiet Legacy Newly Lived." I shut the laptop. No tears, no applause, just stillness. Somewhere outside, a car horn sounded, followed by the low rumble of tires against gravel. I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing out my glass, and caught my reflection in the window. I didn't look the same as I had at Emily's graduation. There was no badge clipped to my coat, no borrowed dress or seat to claim. Just a soft cotton shirt and a bare shoulder catching the light. That old yearning, the one that had followed me for years, whispering that maybe, just maybe, they'd let me back in. It was gone. The next morning, I drove back to Bar Harbor. Not for a meeting, not for any ceremony, just to check in. The trees along the road had started to turn yellow at the edges, red just beginning to bleed through.
I rolled down the window and let the air in. It smelled like salt and pine, like the summers I used to dream about when I still believed the house would be part of my life forever. When I pulled up the gravel drive, I saw the porch light had been left on. One of the residents, Janelle, was sweeping the steps, her hair tied back, earbuds in. She looked up, smiled, and waved. I waved back. Inside the house was quiet, but not still. Books lined the shelf near the fireplace, stacked without much order, the way people do when they're really using them. There were mugs in the sink, printouts scattered across the dining table, and a sticky note on the fridge that read, "Don't forget snacks for the workshop." Someone had drawn a star beside it. I set my bag down near the door and walked into the back room, the one that used to be my grandmother's study. We hadn't changed it much, just updated the lighting and added a few chairs. The old desk was still there, along with the cabinet where she used to keep her notebooks. I'd left it untouched. I stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle. This place wasn't just mine anymore. That's what made it better. Later that afternoon, I sat on the porch with a mug of tea and watched the wind move through the tall grass. I thought about how long I'd spent wanting something from people who had already made up their minds, wanting their approval, their recognition, a seat at a table they'd long since cleared, but that version of belonging had never been mine to hold. I could see that now. The space I'd created here in this house and at the center in Providence wasn't built from what I'd lost. It was built from what I chose to make with what was left. I hadn't seen my parents since the hearing. Emily hadn't written again, and I hadn't reached out. There was nothing else to ask for, nothing else to explain. The legacy they tried to build without me was collapsing quietly. No headlines, no drama, just slow unraveling. I didn't need to watch. My story had already moved on. That night after dinner, I stepped outside one last time. The sky was deepening, streaked with gray and lavender. The porch light cast a soft circle on the steps. As I turned to go back inside, I caught sight of something on the railing. It was the paper badge, the one the little boy from the center had made. Someone had tacked it there, just beside the screen door. The corners were curling the glue, a little faded, but it was still holding together. I reached out and touched it lightly with my fingertips. It didn't look like much, but it meant more than any crest or family seal ever had. For a long time, I believed healing had to come with an apology, that it needed someone else to admit they were wrong, to finally say my name, like it belonged to them again. But now I understood something different. Healing isn't always loud. It doesn't always come dressed in forgiveness or closure. Sometimes it's just the quiet decision to stop waiting for the people who hurt you to make it right and start building a life where you don't need their permission to exist fully. Some wounds don't close because someone fixes them. They close because you stop letting them open. And in the silence they leave behind, you learn to breathe deeper, stand taller, live on your own terms. If you've ever walked away from something that no longer saw your worth, just know it doesn't mean you gave up. It means you finally chose yourself. And sometimes that's the most powerful thing a person can do. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that they matter even when others fail to see it, feel free to share this with them. I'll be here with more stories soon.